one thing I think that's way overrated is the villain motivation, where in order for a villain to be interesting, they have to have a compelling motivation, or they need to have a tragic backstory or something. And some people are just evil, and some people are just have a conflict and are willing with the hero and are willing to do terrible things, which is what makes them a villain.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back. The Eye of the Storm. Me and my boys, Hervey and Daniel.
Yo.
Hey.
And today, we're just going to get straight into it. Guys, what makes a good villain? What's to go first?
So I think the cop-out answer is kind of that a good villain is one that makes an interesting story happen. Because usually the villain is the one who has the agency and the initiative, and the hero reacts. But the kinds that I like, that I think lead to good stories, is when when the villain is kind of a dark mirror image of the hero, right? So we just had that in Dune, where you have these two characters, Paul and Feyd-Rautha, who are kind of come from sort of the same background, have had the same kind of starting positions, but they made different choices and grew up in different environments, and so they're kind of dark mirror images of each other, for example. I think that always leads to interesting stories, and that's, I think, also one of the reasons why I like superhero origin stories more than most people, because the villain there tends to be somebody who came from a similar point as the hero, but just took a different turn somewhere, made a different decision, decided to use their powers in different ways or for different goals or something. So the two are kind of reflections of each other. So those tend to be among my favorite villains.
Cool. So I thought about the question slightly differently. I kind of thought about, some of the makeup of a good villain. So, something like presence, like the villain having like a strong presence in a movie, where either they're like physically imposing, or they just like command authority anytime they speak in the movie. So like for example, like in The Dark Knight Rises, which is a movie that kind of receives mixed reviews, especially sort of the Bane character. But there's like one scene in there where the guy with I can't remember what the character's name is, but the guy with that's been funding all of his activities. So it's like kind of shouting at him and saying whatever, and like says, I'm the one that's in charge, essentially. And then Bane just puts an open palm on his shoulder and says, do you feel like you're in charge? And it's just like stuff like that. It's just like, just kind of gives a villain a bit of a badass, badass characteristics, which for me, I really enjoy in a villain, essentially. And there's other stuff as well, but that's just like kind of like one of the points I wanted to raise.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think there's been a trend in recent years to make the villain a joke or not threatening. And I think that's a huge mistake in almost all cases. Like Star Wars was one of the big cases where all of the villains are basically just jokes and not threatening and can't be taken seriously. And as a result, there's basically no tension. And there's other examples too, where for whatever reason people want villains to not be villainous. And I think that undermines stories almost all of the time.
Yeah, and obviously we've kind of got a trend at the moment where, they try to make the villain a little bit more sympathetic, which I don't think is a bad thing as long as it's done right, because you still have to have the clear distinction that the villain is morally wrong, or the villain is doing bad things, but you have to do it in a way where you can kind of see it. It's like a little bit justified. Obviously, the main example at the moment is sort of Thanos, and the way that he was sort of kind of going about trying to sort of resolve the issues of sort of having finite resources in the universe and trying to sort of bring balance to the universe. So that's like one of the examples that people sort of kind of use for that. But I do also feel that there is room for a villain that is just a straight up villain as well. That is just sort of really just at their core, just a terrible evil person. So like, again, that's like another thing about like, having a good villain is that the villain has to sort of evoke emotion out of you. So again, like with like Thanos, or like that type of thing, you're kind of like sympathizing, you kind of understand where they're going from, they're a little bit misguided or whatever, but a really good villain is one where you like despise them, you like hate them, you can't wait to see them sort of kind of meet their end, essentially. So like Ramsay Bolton in Game of Thrones was just this like one of the most despicable humans I've like ever seen, you know, portrayed on TV. Like he was just ruthless in what he was, in how he was, and that like again like brought out the emotion of like the anger and like, you know, wanting to see his comeuppance eventually in sort of in Game of Thrones. So, you know, I feel like that's another kind of like, you know, thing that the villain needs to have. It just needs to like be able to bring out the emotion out of you, whether it's to sympathize or whether it's just sort of that anger and that hatred.
Yeah, I think you hit on something interesting there, which is the tragic villain backstory, or the villain has a point archetype. Yeah, so one thing I think that's way overrated is the villain motivation, where in order for a villain to be interesting, they have to have a compelling motivation, or they need to have a tragic backstory or something. And some people are just evil, and some people are just have a conflict and are willing with the hero and are willing to do terrible things, which is what makes them a villain. Like Sauron in Lord of the Rings doesn't need a big motivation. He just wants to control everything. He wants to rule everything, right? And there isn't a tragic, as far as I know, a tragic backstory that where he had a tough childhood and that's why he wants revenge on the world or something like that. Like every once in a while that can be interesting. Like Homelander in The Boys is one of those where the character has just this really complex psychology, and he has this really messed up relationship that comes from being the strongest person in the room at all times and never having had a genuine relationship with anybody else as a result. Like that can be really interesting if that's the point of the story. But if it's just a matter of creating a scenario in which the hero needs to do heroic things, I think that a villain can just be out for power or glory or any number of things. And I think actually a lot of complex villain motivations actually kind of unrealistic. A lot of conflicts in reality just come down to two people wanting conflicting things, and some people being willing to cross more lines than others to get there. And that's all you really need for a villain.
Yeah.
Actually, contrary with you two. My opinion is funny enough.
Sure.
Actually, I think a good villain is a villain that we can feel sorry for and then end up rooting for. A good example for me was Joker. Because at first,
Which
was the one that the movie, so the actual Joker film. So okay, but in terms of like seeing the Joker in like animation shows and obviously in the Batman, I think it was Dark Knight Rises.
Dark Knight.
One, yeah. So seeing like, you know, I already know that. Well, I don't fully know the history of Joker, but I've seen the Joker here and there when it comes to animation shows, and obviously the Dark Knight Rises. And this was just a villain. I was like, okay, yeah, I don't like him. Cool, I want Batman to win. But when I saw Joker's actual story, I was like, oh crap. The feeling of being able to resonate with how he feels sometimes just made me kind of like be invested in his character as well as the movie even more overall. Because it's like, I don't know what it was. It was just like, I felt sorry. Like I said, I felt sorry for him. And that feeling was like, damn, like, this guy isn't all that bad. And then, like I said, I was more emotionally invested. And it got to the point where I was actually rooting for this guy. Because I think when it comes to superheroes, they have, like, this, like, they hardly, well, good, not so good superhero movies. A lot of the times they don't have imperfections. And it's like, perfection is what a lot of these superhero movies, like, these superheroes tend to portray. So it's like, yeah, cool, yeah, that's the good guy, that's the chiseled, ripped, you know, guy that gets the girl, the hot girl, the whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm like, yeah, cool, that's cool, you know, good. So I want him to win. But then when you got the actual villain that's, you know, relatable to most of us, could be financial reasons or family reasons or whatever. Like I said, that's when I actually enjoyed. That's when. So after watching the Joker film, I was like, okay, I actually like the Joker. Before I didn't really pay too much attention to the performance. Like I was like, yeah, it's just a villain, cool. But after watching Joker, I was like, damn, like I think I'm more of a fan of Joker than I am of Batman. So I actually do think, like, just, you know, a villain having that relatable story, or a story that we can resonate with, actually, I don't want to use it. Kind of like
it's just like
balances. Sorry.
Yeah, it kind of like ties into what I was saying earlier, where you just have to have some type of emotional connection with the villain, whether it's the sympathizing or whether it's the hatred, just because, you know, you can get
the hatred. I agree with as well. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm not. We're not like disagreeing. I'm just like kind of like enhancing your point in terms of like saying that like you just need to be able to like pull some type of like emotion out of sort of, you know, the audience towards a villain, because you get, you know, villains like the Dark Elves in Thor: The Dark World, which are very like kind of like one tone, very boring. They're not really. They're like they don't really do anything of interest. They're literally there just to be the bad guys, and no one really cares about them. They're very forgettable, essentially. And that's where I feel it can go wrong, where it's just where like the villain just kind of falls flat, where there's like not really anything about them. They're literally there just because they need to have a villain there, basically.
And on the other hand, you have something like Avengers, where the invading villains, just like the Chitauri themselves, don't even have any dialogue. They don't have any motivation. They're just the invaders. And the point is that there needs to be a threat for the Avengers to overcome their personal differences and become a team, right? So they are the perfect villain for that kind of movie, and having a villain with a complex psychology would only distract from that. And then at the same time, you've got like Loki, who has this whole inferiority complex, and jealousy of his brother and stuff like that. So I think it really depends on the story, and there is no one size fits all solution. There just has to be something you can latch onto.
But I think when they can execute both feelings of the feeling of feeling sorry for them and hatred as well, then that's when it can become a masterpiece. Because I think it's one of them ones, when you create that conflicting feeling within yourselves while watching a character, it gets you more emotionally invested. It gets the people going. I'm telling you, I'm serious. I remember whose character was it that I was conflicted so much with. I don't think it was Homelander from The Boys. I don't think it was him, but there was a character I can't remember. But yeah, like I was saying, honestly, when you have a character that can obviously make you want to hate them, but at the same time feel sorry for them, I'm telling you, that is a great villain, because you don't want to support him, but at the same time you do want to support him. It's like, damn. When his death, usually the villain dies. So when his death, it's pretty much inevitable when it happens. Like, damn it hurts you. Whereas if it was a villain that you just hated and they die, a lot of the times the way that these villains end up dying, or the way that they come to their demise or whatever, is not fulfilling. Game of Thrones, for example, Cersei, that one pissed me off. When I found out that Rox killed her, I said, no way. Till this day, that is the worst. Because I hated Cersei to the core. I hate that. I don't like to use the word hate, but I dislike that woman. But then when I found out that she was not found out, when I watched how she died, I was pissed. So yeah. Yeah, pretty much. That's my opinion.
Oh, good. One thing I feel like the villain, needs as well is just that conviction. Just like they just need to be just like kind of like focused, and like everything they're doing with like conviction, essentially. So like they're just like kind of following through, very like narrow-minded, single-minded, and like nothing gets in the way. Like they are very much focused on the task at hand, essentially. And literally anything that comes in their way, they just deal with it effectively.
And they also are willing to break all the rules.
Yeah, essentially.
In order to get what they want, which is kind of something we kind of romanticize and praise in people, right? When they are willing to do what they think is right, even if society doesn't agree or doesn't let them, right? But then you can turn that around, and depending on the methods and the goal, the exact same mindset can lead to being a villain.
Yeah, and you got the example in there of like, again, to use Thanos, because he's like the big villain of like the past how many years of, obviously, when he has to make that difficult choice of, does he follow through this plan that he's had for however many years, and sacrifice his daughter Gamora, or does he like kind of like turn away because he loves his daughter and he has to make that tough decision, and because of his conviction, because of like he's so like single-minded, he just has to make that sacrifice, essentially.
And then you've got the villain in Watchmen who thinks he's saving the world and might even be right about that. But he has to kill thousands and thousands of people to do it, because otherwise it won't work. Yeah. So there's a wide range. There's a wide range of ways you can make this work. You just have to kind of pick a strategy and lean into it.
Yeah.
So do you guys think the villains back in the day, as in, let's say, so when would you say the best period of villains were created? Like, for example, in the 2000s, 2010s, or would you say, 2010 character, or would you say like 2020 and above? So that's 3 years.
So I think it seems like the late 2000s, early 2010s seems to have been kind of a golden age for that a little bit, because if you go earlier than that, they often tend to be very cartoonish. It really depends on the story, right? But just overall, it seems like villains are much more just evil for evil's sake. And then in the last 6-7 years, it's been fashionable to turn them into jokes. But in between, there was this time of the gray of the shades of gray kind of story, like Game of Thrones really really was, I think, a masterclass in that, where it treated every villain like the hero of their own story and really took that cliche seriously. And as a result, we got some really compelling villains out of that. Like you mentioned, Ramsay, but that and Cersei, but then there's others too. Like every single antagonist, like the mutiny at the wall in Game of Thrones, where basically every thought the other person was the villain, and depending on your point of view, you could choose one side or the other, and everybody thought they were saving the world basically, and that could only be done if they stopped the other side. Like that was really really well done as well. But even the smallest characters in that story tended to be written like they were the heroes of their own story, and that was what made them so compelling, even if it's just an outright sociopath like Ramsay Bolton.
Okay. Well, this is a very interesting conversation.
Quickly. Top 3 villains. Name your top 3 villains.
Question for me. I'm one of those people where you have to bring up the movie for me to remember, but of course Joker's going to be number 1.
Really comes down. It's really hard to compare. I always struggle with having favorites because it's so hard to compare different things, right? Like Heath Ledger's Joker is just incredible, and that character makes a joke out of the idea of having a backstory, right? Because every time he's asked, he provides a different backstory, each one more tragic than the last, then he just turns it into a joke. And that idea of somebody just being an agent of chaos is just really really interesting. Then what else?
This is tricky. Hey, Herbert, you have to.
What are your top 3?
Well, my top 3. I mean, I put Thanos in my top 3. But that was simply just the way he was just like beating down all of these characters. And he was like one of the few villains that actually win in their movie. And again, I'm like a fan of villains. So like when he like absolutely like, gave Hulk the beatdown at the start of the movie, I was very much on board with that. And then obviously like kind of like the fight with the fight on Titan. And then when he sort of came down to earth as well, like literally all of those scenes, I was sort of very much on board. And he had that presence that you want in sort of in a villain. So I say him. Also, I brought up Ramsay Bolton for a reason, because again, and having rewatched Game of Thrones as well, and knowing how it ends, I was just like, or not knowing how his sort of end comes about, I was just like this guy is despicable. This guy is just. I'm like, and again, like I'm the type of person that normally likes villains, and I couldn't even like him. He was that bad. I couldn't even like him. He was so evil in what he was doing. And then third, I always save a spot for Darth Vader, and that's mainly just because I just love his design. I love his voice. I love sort of what they did with him. Even though like those are like older movies, and I feel like maybe if they ever rebooted Star Wars, they'd probably maybe do it like a better version of him. But Darth Vader,
I would say you can't improve Darth Vader. Like he's just pitch perfect. And especially once you know his backstory and from the prequels, how he got to be who he is and who he used to be. Like there's endless layers of tragedy in that character. That's definitely one of the big ones.
Yeah, no, I agree. And how I probably meant it was more again like the presence, the physical side of things. And so like one of my favorite scenes of Darth Vader is in Rogue One, the hallway scene when he comes out and he's just like cutting through all the different the rebellion group, like stuff like that, where if they kind of had obviously the same story, but They just told him they just had the modern technology to have better sort of visuals, better fight scenes and stuff like that, better fight choreography. Like in the Obi-Wan series, like the end scene, the end fight scene between him and Obi-Wan was done excellently. That was like such a good last episode. So that was like how I meant it.
I still don't know. Honestly, I'm just gonna say what's the name? Joker, Cersei, because I mentioned her, and I don't think I can mention this, but Frieza. Frieza from Dragon Ball. I don't know. Am I allowed to mention him?
Okay. Yeah, go for it. Why is he one of the best villains?
Frieza was just someone you hated, man. Honestly, like that guy was so ruthless, especially the beating that he gave Vegeta. Oh my god, that beating till this day scarred me. I swear to you, if you haven't seen that beating, you go in, because imagine, I don't know how old I was at the time when I was watching this, but I think I was probably in primary school, so I was like 10 or something, maybe like 10 or 11. That beating that I saw him give him, I was petrified. I thought, and Vegeta was another character that I hated as well, but I couldn't even wish that upon him, because it was watch the beating. Like Frieza was just a freaking menace, and there were like glimpses of hope that you would see that he'll turn into a good guy, but then he'll just ruin it again. It's like, yeah, he's always gonna be evil. Like he's just always gonna be evil. Even his like backstory, I don't think it was that resonant of like. I don't think it was a backstory where I even felt sorry for him as well. So, like I was saying with both of you, I do like agree with you to an extent when it comes to sometimes villains can just be evil, yeah. But I think for me, it makes it perfect when you feel sorry for them as well. So it creates that conflicting feeling. But with Frieza, he was just evil, so it actually worked with him. So I do agree, yeah, it worked with him. But yeah, he was just an evil guy. Honestly, he was just evil. You know, his goal focused upon, like he was focused on his goal 24/7, just to be the most powerfulest villain in that world. Yeah, he just like the things that he did to try and get to that point was just, it was pure evil.
Arguably for me, Majin Buu was slightly more terrifying than Frieza.
I understand why you say that, because he had that like kiddie type of demonic vibe to him, as in like this guy, he was innocent, but at the same time, like he wasn't innocent. The big Buu was innocent. The kid Buu, wait, which one are you talking about? Which Buu are you talking about?
Both, but Kid Buu was on some serious energy.
Cool.
Energy during that, like he killed everyone, went to heaven where they all were, and absolutely gave them another beating in heaven as well. Like he was on some wicked energy. So yeah,
I understand. I think like with Buu, because he had that innocence about him where he looks like a kid, but then he's evil as hell. So it's like, damn, yeah, that guy was petrifying. But yeah, I think Frieza's always gonna. Yeah, he definitely just left that scar on me. So I think Frieza's gonna have to get it for me.
Daniel?
Yeah, one more that came to mind is Alfred Bester from Babylon 5. So I know that both of you haven't seen Babylon 5. So imagine like a psychic Gestapo officer who is one of the most powerful people within the government and is completely unaccountable to anybody and has a completely blank check to do anything he wants. And he basically just shows up as if he owns the place and starts giving orders wherever he goes. Because he can, because he basically he's basically at the top of an organization that is responsible of managing psychics within human society. And he's basically made it all the way up to the top in that organization. And he's kind of a foil for the heroes early on in the story, because they are like harboring refugee psychics who want to escape that organization and stuff. Like there's various different episodes where he appears. And then about halfway through the show, he decides that the people who the heroes are fighting are the real villains, and he kind of not really joins them, but kind of starts working with him. But they can never be sure how much he can be trusted, and they can't even be in the same room with him because they're still hiding stuff from him, and he can just read their minds at will with no legal recourse, no protections against it. And he's just the most confident and cocky and but kind of well-meaning within his own universe. So within his own little world, he is the hero who is trying to save all of Earth and all of humanity from itself, basically, because nobody but him can be trusted with that responsibility. And sometimes sometimes that aligns with the protagonist of the story, and sometimes it's at odds with them, sometimes at the same time or within the same episode. and he's just a really, really cool villain. He's like one of the most memorable. Like he has like we said earlier, a good villain tends to have a lot of presence, and that guy is just pure presence. Like he walks into a room and he is like he like, to say that he owns the place is understating it. So yeah, he's one of the greats as well.
Sounds like my type of guy.
All right, well, guys, thank you very much for today's discussion, whatever you want to call it. And everyone at home, I hope you enjoyed. But who is your favorite villain and what makes a good villain as well? Comment down below. Before we head out, Hervé, do you want to plug in your plugin?
Yeah, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Of course.
Thank you very much. And also, we'll be reacting to next. Well, no, sorry. So check out our film movie reviews. The movie review which you guys need to check out is what, Daniel? After this video?
Imaginary.
Imaginary is next up.
Imaginary. Cool. Guys, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we will catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.